Have you ever wondered why one of Formula One's most legendary teams can have unlimited passion, incredible talent, millions of devoted fans around the world, and still keep running into the exact same problem year after year? What if the biggest obstacle at Ferrari isn't the drivers, the engineers, or even the car itself? What if it's something much deeper that's been hiding inside Maranello for years? Because now, after months of speculation, Lewis Hamilton said something that shocked Formula One fans, and surprisingly, Ferrari team principal Fred Vasseur didn't deny it. Instead, he admitted there was truth behind Hamilton's frustration. That single agreement has opened the conversation that Ferrari supporters have been waiting years to hear. But what exactly is the problem, and why could this admission completely change Ferrari's future? The answer isn't as simple as a slow upgrade package or a difficult race weekend. It goes much deeper than that. When Lewis Hamilton decided to join Ferrari, it felt like one of the biggest stories Formula One had seen in decades. Here was the most successful driver in the sport's history choosing to leave the comfort of Mercedes for the challenge of restoring Ferrari to championship glory. The excitement was impossible to ignore. Fans imagined Hamilton wearing red, fighting at the front, and finally giving Ferrari the world championship that had slipped away for so many years. On paper, the timing looked perfect. Ferrari had just finished incredibly close to McLaren in the Constructors' Championship. The team looked competitive, the momentum seemed positive, and expectations couldn't have been higher. But Formula One has a habit of reminding everyone that expectations don't win races. Performance does. Instead of immediately competing for victories every weekend, Hamilton found himself adapting to an environment that operated very differently from what he had experienced throughout most of his career. Driving style adjustments were only part of the challenge. Understanding Ferrari's internal processes became an even bigger task. According to Hamilton, the biggest frustration wasn't necessarily speed, it was how slowly ideas appeared to move from conversation into reality. That's a fascinating distinction because most fans naturally assume that Formula One success depends almost entirely on designing the fastest car. Of course, that's important, but inside modern Formula One, the speed at which an organization reacts to problems can sometimes matter just as much as the raw pace of the machine itself. Think about the current era of Formula One. Development never stops. Every single race weekend produces thousands of pieces of information. Engineers examine tire temperatures, aerodynamic efficiency, suspension behavior, simulator data, and driver feedback. Every detail becomes another opportunity to improve. The teams that consistently fight for championships aren't simply the ones with brilliant engineers. They're usually the ones capable of turning information into improvements faster than everyone else. And that's exactly where Hamilton believed Ferrari had been falling behind. According to comments reported earlier this season, Hamilton explained that repeatedly raising concerns without seeing meaningful changes eventually felt like banging his head against a wall. Those words immediately caught attention because Hamilton has rarely spoken so openly about internal team processes during his career. He wasn't attacking individuals. Instead, he appeared to question the overall culture surrounding development and innovation. That difference matters. Criticizing one engineer is completely different from suggesting an entire organization has become too comfortable with the way it works. One is a personnel issue. The other is a cultural issue, and culture is far harder to change than a front wing or a suspension component. For years, Ferrari has been surrounded by enormous expectations unlike any other team on the Formula One grid. Every decision attracts worldwide attention. Every mistake becomes front-page news. Every upgrade is analyzed by millions of passionate supporters. Living under that pressure naturally creates a difficult balancing act. Do you take bold technical risks that might fail, or do you play it safe and protect the team's reputation? That question has quietly followed Ferrari through multiple generations of regulations. Sometimes caution protects reliability. Other times, caution prevents innovation. The remarkable part is that Hamilton wasn't simply asking Ferrari to build faster parts. He appeared to be asking the team to become more willing to experiment. In Formula One, innovation doesn't always guarantee success. In fact, some of the greatest technical breakthroughs initially looked like failures. But without teams willing to test unusual concepts, the sport would never evolve. This is where the story takes an unexpected turn. Most people assumed Hamilton's comments would create tension between driver and management. That's usually how Formula One works. A driver voices frustration, the team offers a carefully worded response, and everyone moves on. But that's not what happened here. Instead, Fred Vasseur responded in a way that surprised many observers. Rather than rejecting Hamilton's criticism, Vasseur openly acknowledged that Ferrari may indeed have become too comfortable in certain areas. He explained that one of his biggest objectives has been encouraging the team to take more technical risks instead of automatically choosing conservative solutions. Those comments reveal something extremely important. If both the 7-time world champion inside the cockpit and the team principal outside the cockpit identify the same weakness independently, then we're probably no longer talking about a temporary disagreement. We're talking about a genuine organizational challenge that both leaders recognize. And that's where Ferrari's 2026 project suddenly becomes far more interesting than many people realize. Because admitting a weakness is only the first step. The much bigger question is whether Ferrari has actually changed the way it develops a Formula One car, or whether these are simply encouraging words that still need to be proven on the track. And surprisingly, Vasseur believes the evidence is already starting to appear. One of the most interesting parts of Fred Vasseur's explanation wasn't simply that Ferrari needed to become more aggressive. It was how openly he described the team's change in mindset. Rather than pretending everything had always been under control, he admitted that Ferrari had perhaps become too comfortable in certain areas. A little too comfortable over the past few seasons. In Formula One, that's a surprisingly honest statement, because team principals rarely acknowledge cultural weaknesses in public. Most prefer to focus on optimism, future plans, or isolated technical issues. Vasseur took a different approach. He suggested that changing the way people think inside the factory could be just as important as changing the car itself. That raises an important question. What does taking more risks actually mean in Formula One? It doesn't mean making reckless decisions or ignoring data. In reality, Formula One teams calculate risk every single day. Engineers spend countless hours using simulations, wind tunnel testing, computational fluid dynamics, and race data before approving even the smallest aerodynamic update. But eventually, there comes a moment where every team has to make a choice. Do they follow the path everyone else already understands, or do they gamble on a concept that nobody has fully proven yet? History shows that some of Formula One's greatest breakthroughs happened because someone was willing to challenge conventional thinking. The teams remembered for dominating entire eras weren't always the ones with the biggest budgets. They were often the teams brave enough to introduce ideas that initially looked unusual. Sometimes those innovations failed spectacularly, but when they succeeded, they forced every rival to spend months trying to catch up. Ferrari knows that reality better than almost anyone. Throughout its legendary history, Ferrari has produced revolutionary racing cars, iconic drivers, unforgettable championship battles, and engineering ideas that shaped Formula One for generations. But modern Formula One is different from the sport Ferrari dominated decades ago. Regulations are tighter, financial rules are stricter, development windows are smaller. Every tenth of a second has become incredibly expensive to find. That means hesitation can be almost as costly as making the wrong decision. Vasseur offered one particularly revealing example when discussing Ferrari's current philosophy. He pointed towards aggressive design choices that included the chassis and what has become known as the Macarena rear wing concept. He admitted that when Ferrari first committed to developing that design, the team wasn't completely certain it would deliver the results they hoped for. That uncertainty was exactly the point. Instead of waiting until every possible answer had been calculated, Ferrari accepted that innovation sometimes requires stepping into the unknown. Think about how different that sounds compared to Hamilton's earlier frustrations. Hamilton described repeatedly offering feedback while feeling that meaningful action arrived too slowly. Vasseur is now describing a Ferrari that's actively encouraging engineers to make bolder technical decisions before absolute certainty exists. Those two perspectives almost feel like opposite sides of the same conversation. One identifies the old problem, the other attempts to describe the new solution. Of course, saying you changed is much easier than proving it. Formula One fans have heard ambitious promises from every team on the grid. Every winter, every launch event, every preseason interview brings renewed confidence. Then the lights go out at the first Grand Prix, and reality begins separating optimism from performance. That's why Ferrari supporters remain cautiously hopeful rather than completely convinced. They've experienced too many seasons that started with excitement before fading into disappointment. In many ways, that emotional roller coaster has become part of supporting Ferrari. Every new regulation cycle creates fresh optimism. Every promising testing session fuels championship dreams. Then one unexpected weakness appears, rival teams develop faster, and suddenly another season becomes an exercise in asking what might have been. Hamilton undoubtedly understood that pressure before signing his contract. He wasn't joining a midfield project hoping for gradual improvement. He was joining Formula One's most famous team, where finishing second often feels like failure, and where every race weekend becomes a global headline regardless of the result. That environment can inspire greatness. It can also amplify every weakness. Interestingly, the source suggested there's another reason why Ferrari chose to become more adventurous this year. According to him, the beginning of a new regulation cycle naturally creates more opportunities to discover performance through original ideas. As regulations mature over several seasons, teams gradually converge towards similar technical solutions. Once that convergence happens, finding entirely new performance gains becomes dramatically harder. It's a fascinating observation because it explains why timing matters so much in Formula One development. Early in a regulation era, creativity offers enormous rewards. Later, those opportunities shrink as competitors copy successful concepts. That's exactly why Vasseur believes boldness becomes especially valuable before everyone settles into similar engineering philosophies. If he's right, Ferrari's willingness to experiment today could provide advantages that become impossible to create several years from now. But taking risks comes with another challenge that Formula One teams constantly wrestle with. Resources aren't unlimited. Every major upgrade consumes engineering hours, manufacturing capacity, testing simulations, and valuable budget under Formula One's financial regulations. Choosing one development direction automatically means sacrificing another. That's where strategy becomes just as important as innovation. A brilliant idea introduced too late may never influence the championship. A risky concept introduced too early could consume resources without delivering meaningful performance. Every decision becomes a balancing act between confidence and courage, and that's precisely why Hamilton's comments carried so much weight. A driver doesn't simply evaluate whether the car feels fast. Drivers experience how quickly problems are identified, discussed, prioritized, and solved. They see whether feedback disappears into meetings or returns as tangible improvements. Over hundreds of laps, they develop an instinct for whether the organization around them is reacting with urgency or becoming trapped in familiar routines. Hamilton's comments suggested he wanted Ferrari to operate with greater urgency. Vasseur's response suggests he agreed. Now comes the difficult part, turning agreement into championships, because Formula One has never rewarded good intentions. It rewards execution. And while Ferrari has clearly embraced a more aggressive philosophy, another major voice inside the Formula One paddock isn't altogether convinced that this approach comes without consequences. That voice belongs to Mercedes team principal Toto Wolff, and his warning has already sparked another fascinating debate. About Ferrari's future, Toto Wolff's observation immediately caught attention because it came from someone who understands exactly how difficult it is to balance performance with Formula One's financial regulations. According to reports, the Mercedes team principal questioned whether Ferrari's aggressive development approach could eventually create pressure under the sport's cost cap. In simple terms, his argument suggested that constantly introducing bold, new concepts might become expensive enough to create problems later in the season. It was an interesting point because Formula One is no longer just a competition of engineering brilliance. It's also a competition of financial discipline. But Ferrari didn't seem concerned. Fred Vasseur dismissed that suggestion almost immediately, making it clear that he believed Ferrari's development strategy remained under control. That confidence says a lot about how the team currently views its own direction. Instead of appearing defensive, Ferrari projected the image of an organization that believes it's finally moving with purpose rather than hesitation. Whether that confidence proves correct is something only future race weekends can answer, but internally the message appeared remarkably consistent. What's fascinating is how this entire conversation extends far beyond one aerodynamic package or one championship campaign. It's really about identity. Every Formula One team develops its own personality over time. Some organizations become known for relentless innovation. Others become famous for operational precision. Some thrive because of extraordinary leadership, while others build reputations for maximizing every available resource despite limited budgets. Ferrari's identity has always been unique. No other Formula One team carries the same emotional connection with the sport. For millions of fans, Ferrari isn't simply another constructor. It's the symbol of Formula One itself. Victories feel larger, defeats feel heavier, expectations never disappear. That emotional weight creates an unusual challenge inside the factory. Every engineer understands that one successful innovation could become legendary, but every unsuccessful experiment could also become tomorrow's headline. When people work under that level of scrutiny year after year, it's understandable why decision-making sometimes becomes cautious. Yet modern Formula One rarely rewards excessive caution. The teams consistently fighting for championships have repeatedly demonstrated an ability to adapt faster than everyone else. They recognize weaknesses quickly. They accept uncomfortable feedback. Most importantly, they transform information into action before competitors can respond. That's exactly why Hamilton's comments resonated with so many people throughout the paddock. His frustration wasn't centered on one disappointing race result. It reflected a broader concern about organizational responsiveness. When Hamilton spoke about wanting Ferrari to become one of Formula One's leading innovators again, he wasn't asking for miracles. He was describing the mindset he had experienced during championship-winning years elsewhere. Innovation isn't only about discovering revolutionary ideas. Sometimes it's about creating an environment where every member of the organization feels encouraged to challenge existing assumptions. That may sound like a subtle difference. In reality, it can determine whether a team gains 0.3 of a second or loses them. Formula One has entered an era where tiny performance differences decide championships. One better qualifying lap, one more efficient upgrade, one smarter strategy call, one slightly more effective development process. Each individual advantage appears small in isolation. Together, they become championship-winning margins. Ferrari understands this better than almost anyone because the team has spent years watching rivals gradually build those small advantages into significant gaps. Sometimes Ferrari possessed the faster car over a single lap, but struggled to maintain development momentum throughout the season. Other times, operational mistakes overshadowed competitive pace. In several campaigns, promising starts slowly faded as competitors introduce stronger upgrade packages. That's why this conversation feels different. Instead of discussing another individual mistake, Ferrari is discussing the underlying culture that may have contributed to several different problems across multiple seasons. Changing culture is one of the hardest challenges in any high-performance organization. You can't redesign it over one weekend. You can't manufacture it in a wind tunnel. You can't purchase it with additional funding. It develops gradually through leadership, trust, accountability, and repeated decisions made under pressure. Fred Vasseur appears determined to influence exactly those areas. Interestingly, he even referenced his previous experience leading Sauber, explaining that the team embraced a culture of taking calculated risks despite having far fewer resources than Ferrari. That comparison is revealing because smaller organizations often survive by being creative. They simply can't outspend larger rivals, so they compete through innovation and flexibility. Vasseur seems eager to bring that same mentality into one of Formula One's biggest organizations. The question now becomes whether Ferrari's enormous structure can successfully adopt that mindset. Large organizations naturally move more slowly, more departments, more approvals, more complexity, sometimes more hesitation. Transforming that environment requires more than motivational speeches. It requires consistent action over months and years. Perhaps that's why Hamilton's public comments matter so much. Great drivers don't simply influence lap times, they influence standards. When a 7-time world champion repeatedly emphasizes urgency, innovation, and responsiveness, people listen, not because championships automatically make every opinion correct, but because experience provides perspective. Hamilton has worked inside multiple championship-winning organizations. He's witnessed how elite teams respond when problems appear. That experience becomes valuable even before the car reaches a circuit. At the same time, Vasseur's willingness to publicly acknowledge Hamilton's concerns sends another important message throughout Ferrari. Constructive criticism isn't automatically viewed as disloyalty. Instead, it can become the starting point for meaningful improvement. That's a healthy sign for any organization pursuing championships. Looking ahead, Ferrari's biggest challenge won't simply be producing one fast car. It will be proving that its new philosophy continues delivering improvements even when inevitable setbacks arrive. Every Formula One season includes disappointing weekends. Every team encounters unexpected technical problems. Every championship campaign eventually tests confidence. The organizations that recover fastest usually become the ones celebrating in the end. So perhaps the most significant takeaway from this entire story isn't that Hamilton criticized Ferrari, and it isn't that Vasseur agreed with him. It's that for the first time in a long time, Ferrari's leadership appears willing to openly discuss a cultural issue that many observers quietly suspected had existed for years. According to the reporting, both men identified the same challenge from different perspectives, and both pointed towards a more innovative, more aggressive approach as the path forward. Whether that transformation ultimately delivers championship success remains impossible to confirm today. Formula One has a way of surprising everyone. Rivals continue improving, regulations continue evolving, competitive advantages disappear almost as quickly as they emerge. But one thing seems increasingly clear. Inside Maranello, the conversation has changed. Instead of asking whether Ferrari should take more risks, the team now appears focused on how quickly it can turn those risks into competitive advantages. And if Hamilton's observations and Vasseur's admissions truly represent a beginning of a new culture rather than a temporary change in messaging, Ferrari may be finally addressing a challenge that quietly influences fortunes for longer than most people realized. Only the coming seasons will reveal whether this new philosophy becomes the foundation of Ferrari's return to the very top, or simply another promising chapter in the team's long search for championship glory.